Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Holly Pasut, and she's here today to share with us her new book, A Strange Path to Freedom: White-Collar Professional Finds Inspiration and Gratitude in Federal Prison. Now, Holly is a widow and single mother of 3 children and was a nationally recognized real estate agent in a booming market. Then she said yes to something that landed her in federal prison. A Strange Path to Freedom shares her slice of prison life through her quirky and sometimes spiritual lens, as well as the wisdom she gained from the experience. Holly spent time in a physical prison, but often people imprison themselves with their thoughts and feelings. Her story offers a guide to others to free themselves from negative thoughts and emotions that lock them in, and they offer a cautionary tale for navigating ethical choices in the workplace. So let's welcome to the show, Holly Pasut.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, what a joy it is to have you here. And my goodness, I think your book is a must-read for everyone who's in business.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, we'll get into your story here in just a little bit, but, when people start off as entrepreneurs and they start off in different industries, a lot of times they can be kind of caught unaware, so they really need to make sure that they are strong within themselves and really know their boundaries. And I think that your message really speaks to that.
Yeah, I thought I knew my boundaries, interestingly enough, I have to say. But, when you're in business, you've got a lot going on. Well, I had a lot going on, and I made some poor decisions that I never thought I'd be caught up in this kind of a web that I found myself caught up in.
Well, and it's really interesting. So for our listeners that are new to your story, why don't you share a little bit? We're not going to go too much into your story because we want, of course, people to pick up their own copy of A Strange Path to Freedom. But why don't you share a little bit for our listeners so that they can get to know you?
Sure. Okay. So I'll do this in a nutshell, the best that I can. So I consider myself probably, your neighbor, the girl next door. I was a widowed mother, and I had 3 great children. I was single. I became a very successful real estate agent. And, I was just that lady, juggling the career, juggling the baseball games, the kids, and so forth. I landed up trusting a group of I'll just call them very bad people that were committing mortgage fraud and, I guess, laundering money. I made some poor decisions when asked to do some things, and I landed up getting charged with conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud and money laundering. To take it a step further, I was sentenced to prison for 21 months, and I served 13 months in a federal prison. Obviously, I'm home. I survived it. It wasn't fatal. Kids are great. I'm finding my way, and that's kind of what propelled me to write the book.
Well, I really applaud you for writing the book because it does give a very honest viewpoint of what was going on, because I think most anybody can find themselves in this type of situation. You really don't, sometimes you don't know who you're doing business with, and you really have to kind of check, what is really happening with your inner guidance.
Right. It's interesting because when I give a talk, I speak around the country, but when I speak, I talk about the person. I say, well, I knew this man. And then I have to pause and I have to say to myself, listen to how I'm talking. I knew this man. Just like you said, I didn't know him. You don't really know anybody. It's sometimes you don't even know your husband or your boyfriend.
Yeah.
I mean, we say that word so loosely. We don't know what goes on in their personal lives or what they might be scheming or what's presented to them. You just really never know.
Well, and it sounds like, just from reading the book and the different videos of some of the speeches that you've given as well, that, it was kind of really, these guys were pretty predatory. They knew what they were doing when they were asking you to do certain things, and they made it sound pretty good. And when you have a boss that's asking you to help, you want to be a helper,
Yeah. Well, you have to keep this in mind, too. I am not smart enough I am not that crafty. There is no way I could have orchestrated such a huge case. This was one of the largest mortgage fraud cases in the United States, and I am very, very sorry for the people that were hurt and victimized by this. Many people were unfairly. However, the people that orchestrated it, they're brilliant. I mean, they're very, very sharp, and I did not know that they were doing that. Had I known, I never would have been a part of that. I had no reason to be a part of that. So that's the scary part. You can be a part of something unbeknownst to you, the full awareness or the full scheme as to what's going on. But unfortunately, my behavior and my actions helped them or him or whoever further their crime. And that's why I got charged.
Well, and so, I mean, horrifyingly enough, then you find yourself, now you're, in prison, you're spending this time here. What were some of the things that you learned about yourself while you were there?
Oh, wow. I don't want to suggest everyone go to prison for a year, but it is it's kind of like a luminous darkness. I mean, it's a dark place because I never considered myself a criminal. I mean, just to say that word, it would be like, it's Marianne, you don't want to say, hi, I'm Marianne, I'm a criminal. It just is horrible. So I felt like I had this big, ugly X on my head the whole time. But then I realized that all the other women in here are facing the same thing. So over time, I learned to let go of the image I had for myself. I learned to let go of Holly, untarnished, Holly, the great reputation, Holly, the realtor, Holly, the wonderful mother. I had to let go of all those things that I thought I was. And as you shed all those things, I found myself just getting to know my core. And there were things about my core that I loved, that I wanted to keep, I didn't want to lose. And there were things about my core that I felt I wanted to change. I wanted to do things differently. So prison helped to teach me or guide me to have an honest self-reflection, honest examination. And you might want to defend yourself if someone says you are not sympathetic or you need to show more gratitude. You might want to argue it. In prison, you don't argue it. They work you, so you really learn to change some of your critical thinking behaviors. So for that, I'm very grateful for that trip. I don't want to go back, though. Don't take it as I want to sign up and go back. I don't. I'm good. I've learned enough.
Yeah. Well, and being in different situations, I think we all learn more about ourselves in different ways than we ever thought possible. It's kind of like, being a diamond that just has another facet that's being polished that equals us. It's not really good or bad. It's just we're having these life experiences that are moving us forward.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talk sometimes that the ego self is the unobserved self. Now, in prison, I was observing myself because I kept asking myself, why? Why, Holly? Why did you say yes? Why? And I had to lay that ego down. And I had to start observing what was it about Holly that would uncover so I could learn what was it about me that made me feel as, why I had to say yes. So that that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think more people should spend more time looking at themselves rather than flaunting how great they are. You know?
Yeah.
So
it's self-reflection. Well, and during that time also, and since then, what have you learned about your self-worth?
My self-worth? What have I learned about my self-worth? Well, I've learned that we're all going to have a chip. We're all going to fall from time to time. I have learned that this is not what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I was a little girl. This is not what I aspired to be. But I think that, I'm a pretty faithful woman, and I think God works through all of us, and I'll speak to myself. But even though this isn't what I signed up for, I feel I can do something good with it rather than become resentful, spiteful, unworthy. I don't look at it like that. I try to live a new way of thinking, that through what happened, I can show courage and strength, and I can still lead and motivate and encourage. And, it's easy to do those things when life is great to you, but when you get it from someone who's been through, hell and back, I think it causes audiences to pause and listen.
Well, when you've been there and done that, and really, it's interesting. It's kind of like we're not really tested, and again, I'm kind of using a different analogy here, but having those tests of the soul and the spirit don't really happen unless we're put under pressure, under fire.
Right.
Then we really see what we're made of.
Right. That is so true. That's why they say it's, be grateful. Be grateful for the turbulence and so forth, the trials and the turbulence. But, it's not like you're saying, oh, gee, I'm really grateful for it. But it's what you learn after you go through it. And, I spoke recently in Boston, and a lady came up to me. She was a realtor, and she said, your story resonated with me so much. She said, but it's so different. She said, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. She said, and I never want to have cancer again. She said, but what I learned and what I went through, she said, I see the world so much differently, better. And, so we had a great conversation. And that just goes to your point that it's going through those tough times. It's horrible. But when you get through it and it's behind you, that's when the lessons start to feel, they feel good. And you feel worthy. You feel triumphal. And it's hard to explain unless you go through it,
Well, and everyone has that kind of test. And it's interesting because we do get that also, that intuitive kind of nudge one way or the other most of the time, I would think, when we're going through these difficult times.
Yes. Because friends would ask me, they'd say, Holly, didn't you have any idea? Didn't you think it was kind of weird? Didn't you, didn't your radar, pick up a signal? And for a long time, I just said no. But then when I got to prison, I really said, okay, Holly, come on, you've got to come clean. And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I said, I did think he was weird. I did think he was strange. But I did not think that I was personally doing anything illegal or fraudulent. And that's where the disconnect was. And that's important for people to realize. You might not be doing anything wrong, but you know that somebody else that's, in the transaction, if they're doing something wrong, you're a part of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. When we look at like entrepreneurs, salespeople, this can relate to people who are in insurance. You get a manager sometimes that will ask to do different things that, you're kind of sitting there going, should I even be doing this? So it's interesting. I think a lot of people can easily put themselves in your situation when they're trying to assess, is this something I should even be doing or not? So what are some tips that you can give our listeners, if they are in situations where they have a really demanding boss or someone that's going, well, I'm not really too sure about you, but I think you're on board now since you're going to take care of this stuff for me.
Right. That's a good question. I use that as a hypothetical example when I speak, especially to university students, our future leaders. And it goes on, just like you said. For example, what tip could I give is probably to have courage to do the harder right versus the easier wrong. You have to have courage, whether it's your boss or whoever. Not too long ago, I had a realtor. She emailed me, and she said, I read your book, and I read about you, and she said, I think you just saved me from making a big mistake. Because exactly what you said, we'll just say boss, her boss asked her to do something, and she knew it was wrong. And she started to do it. And then she thought about it afterwards and called him up and said, I'm not going to do this. And he said, well, we'll talk about it on Monday, whether you have a job or not. So she was scared to death, thinking she was going to get fired. And I spoke to her a few times over that weekend. And then she called me Monday, and she said she got there Monday all prepared to get fired. But if she was not going to get fired, she was going to quit. And she said she didn't know where her paycheck was going to come from. And I told her, I said, let me tell you, you'll make $5.25 if you go to prison. You stand a greater chance of making money if you stay free. So you've got to, not to do what he's asking you to do. And so now the choice is yours. Well, interestingly enough, she told me that it turned out that her boss was being pressured by his boss. I know. So
that is
good.
It's
not good, but it's not good. But you have to have courage, and when you're tested, I failed my test, and my biggest tip is to know that it's real, and you don't want to go to prison. You have to have courage to do the harder right versus the easier wrong, and it can be hard.
Well, I probably disagree with you a little bit on you failed your lesson, because when I look at failure, it's more of not really being able to learn from an experience and repeating it. So you're taking this and you're teaching people, do what's right. It's going to be hard sometimes. Have the courage to say no, and, be prepared to walk away if you need to.
Right. Yeah. You have to be prepared. And that's the hard part, because people, you might say, well, what am I going to do? But you're not going to do anything if you end up going to prison. And, I kind of look at life now as two buckets. For me, life was all about one bucket, success, because, we're taught to master skills, for great success, and we're taught to promote ourselves and so forth. But I now realize that we have two buckets. We have a success bucket and a failure bucket. But I think that the bucket that I'm most interested in now is my failure bucket, because that's, like, to your point, that's the growing opportunities.
Well, I so agree with you. I mean, that's where we can kind of look at things and go, gosh, okay, this is where I can be better. This is where I can show up better, and this is where I can help people.
Right. Exactly. Yep. I know that I have, and I also know that I have in my own children, and for that, it was worth the trip. It was definitely worth the trip, because I've seen them where they might have said yes to something that they now say no to it. And I'm like, yay! Yay for the no! Yes, lose your job, yay!
I think, it's interesting, looking, when we just look, because I worked in insurance for a long time, and there would be just things that you're like, there's just no way that that's going to be okay, and different things would come up. But it's interesting when you're working with different people who, like this one lady you were mentioning, who her boss was kind of threatening her, it's like, oh, you might not have a job. And, you look at these different things, and it has to get to a point, because I've heard people say, well, I'm a people pleaser. I like to be helpful. And it's like, when do you get to be helpful for yourself,
Right, yeah. I think a lot of us find ourselves putting ourselves in situations that we risk harm to ourselves. And, I mean, I clearly did that. I wasn't very familiar with, the word codependent or codependent characteristics. And there's a book, I think, called Codependent No More. And, I mean, it just wasn't even an appealing word to me because, we talk about being independent and strong and powerful and all those wonderful adjectives. But some of us might, it may show up more in a personal life. It might show up more in your your professional life. And I think women especially tend to be, I think we're just kind of genetically threaded that way a little bit as being the mother, the maternal, the martyr, to some degree. And I think it is important that you can be loving and kind and helpful, but that doesn't mean you're a doormat. And that doesn't mean that you are not permitted to have a boundary. And I just, dragged my tongue across the pavement to please everybody. But I don't do that anymore. And I'm so much of a better Holly today. So much better.
Do you feel happier that you've made changes in that aspect? Because I think a lot of people are afraid that they'll lose their purpose if they change being a people pleaser.
Well, some people may not. They may not. I love that question. Some people might not recognize you that knew you before. They might say, "This person's changed. I don't like her anymore." Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. You don't go to prison, and for me, I am different. I'm not the same person who went in. Now there's a lot about me that is the same, but there's some other aspects of me now. And when I revert back to the old Holly, I have to referee myself a little bit and say, okay, Holly, you need to just, you need to slow your roll a little bit. You need to, back off and get back to being a little bit more open-minded. But I think that some people they're not used to the change in you. And so you might lose those people along the way. And that's okay. That's totally fine. But yes, I am happier. I'm sad for what happened, but I am really very peaceful. I am very happy.
Well, I think
I have so much to be grateful for. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important for people to hear that because, you can be a person who says no, and not have it be a thing that that now that you're not in a position where you're trying to make everybody happy or trying to be the good person in the office or whatever the case is, it's okay to stand strong and say no, I'm not okay with that. And I love how you talked about when you do make these changes, people may or may not like you later because you've changed. You're probably no longer accessible to being the person that would be the doormat or would be the person that they could just go to and you would do anything,
Right. Yeah, it is hard. And a lot of times, sometimes people they'll ask you to do something based on what they think you should do, right? Don't you know people that will say, well, you should do this and you should do that and blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't think anybody has the right to tell someone what they should do. You should go visit your mother. You should go, buy a new dress. And I used to talk like that. I don't think it's right for people to tell other people based on what they think someone else should do. So when people talk like that to me now, I just ignore it. Whereas before, I would try to take everybody's advice. Now, I just ignore it. All that contentment comes from the inside. You know, not all the things I have around myself anymore. I lost a lot of those things, but it's okay. So my happiness, my peace, my contentment, it's that I just feel full. I feel good inside.
Well, and how important is that? Because it leaves a different legacy, you know, of fulfillment where people can see how you're making an impact in the world and how happy you are with the person that you are.
Yeah, that we all have that. But I just think we get caught up in the environment and our culture. And I know people who have a lot of money, live in penthouse apartments who are ready to jump, you know, or it's a horrible day because they weren't able to get their massage. And I'm like, I know. Listen, I don't have a halo over my head at all, but I wake up in the morning and I'm just thankful that I can turn on my kitchen light. I'm thankful that I have water. I'm thankful that I have electricity and I can make my coffee. I have eyes. I can read a book. I've backed way down to being thankful for so many things that we take for granted. But that doesn't mean, I still like beautiful things. Yes, I love anything that sparkles, and I love, you know, shoes and clothes and good food. But I don't forget about those basic things. I just think that's important to balance your life with gratitude to the little things.
I love that. And that is so important because there is so much that people take for granted.
Yeah, we do. We really do. But I think when we have conversations like you and I are having, it does bring in an awareness. And, you know, I would tell my kids sometimes, I said, be thankful that you have legs, that you can get out of bed and you can walk across the room. How many people can't even do that? You know, you've got to step back and look all that you really do have.
Well, and, you know, your book is just such a great resource for people that are finding themselves with maybe questions in their lives or working with a tyrant boss or feeling like they're not really sure about what's going on. A Strange Path to Freedom is, you know, a very heartfelt, touching way for people to get in touch with how can I make changes for me? You know, and your story does help people through that.
Well, you know, when I wrote the book, I wasn't really planning on writing a book. When I came home from prison, I found myself just writing, and I journaled a lot when I was in prison. I would just write things, and so when I came home, I didn't want to forget some things, but the one thing I really noticed was when I was incarcerated, after a while, it wasn't instantly, I started to feel mentally pretty free. I didn't have the demands of checking emails and returning phone calls and putting out the daily fires and all that stuff. My life was very basic, very elementary. Well, when I came home, I felt pretty happy just for everything. But I noticed that the people around me were stressed, agitated, mad, irritable, and I thought, wow, they seem like they have all this freedom, and they seem so mentally imprisoned in their own thoughts. I said, wouldn't it be nice if you could be free physically and mentally? So I started writing the book about the difference between the people on the outside and the people on the inside, and the things that we would do in prison that still made us feel like people, but that made us laugh and made us cry. And, you know, there's no text messaging in prison. You know, you are talking. You're spending hours and hours at a picnic table. every day on the compound looking at the same person that's wearing the same thing you're wearing, and you talk. And it was just fascinating. I call them picnic table talks. And I even told my kids, I said, we ought to continue that, because I learned so much about you when you came to visit me, because it's all we did was sit and talk. There was nothing else to do. So anyway, the book is funny, about how we pretended we were eating, at 5-star restaurants when we were eating food that was barely for human consumption, but we had to find some lightness while we were there. And I was a master at finding that.
Well, you do so well, just not only your public speaking, but your book, and also all the information that you offer regarding how to make dramatic changes. I mean, you probably don't feel that way, but from my viewpoint, it's like a 180 in being a person that can really take challenge head on. And it's, I just applaud you, because it's got to have been just a most difficult time to have walked through. And you really have come out the other side just doing, just being a light for other people.
Well, I think most of us, I think most women, really, I believe that most women would pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do what they've got to do. I think most women are fighters, and if you have children, you have still a responsibility. And I think women are much tougher than maybe we get credit for. But you don't know what you're made of until you really are in that situation.
Well, Holly, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, I'm on Facebook. It's Freedom Speaker. That's probably an easy way. They can go to my website, which is freedomspeaker.com, and they can contact me through that. I'm pretty, when I get Amazon reviews, I reply back. I've had people email me directly, and I don't mind giving that out. It's Holly at freedomspeaker.com. And we're social animals. I'm flattered when somebody reaches out to me, so I always reply back.
Well, I'm so delighted that we got to spend this time together today, Holly. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Holly. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, A Strange Path to Freedom. Again, if you'd like to connect with Holly, you can at freedomspeaker.com, and we'll have the link below. Her book, A Strange Path to Freedom, is available on her website, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.